the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the trees of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Tony Lorenzen, the minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden at the Mattatuck Unitarian Universalist Society. With me this morning is our worship associate from the Unitarian Church in Meriden, Peg Kirkpatrick.
Good morning.
We're really excited to join us here on this Memorial Day weekend, Sunday morning. We were hoping to outside, getting rain that we need, and it's taking care of the interdependent existence and our flowers and our new garden. So we will come to you live in person in real time this morning from the sanctuary here at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden. If you are new to us, this is your first time joining us online, please say hello in the chats. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, let us know you're watching. And if you like what you're watching this morning, please share this on your social media with your friends. If you'd like to learn more about our congregations, you can go to our websites, uucentralc.org and muusct.org. This morning, we're going to continue our month-long look at the spiritual theme of story. And this Memorial Day weekend, we're going to celebrate stories of those who gave their life in military service to our country, but we're also going to take a look at some of the lives of people who have given their life to our country in creating beloved community and making those rights and freedoms that we fight for available for more and more people. We're going to begin our service with Unitarian Universalist lighting the Sim Faith tradition, the flaming chalice. And as Peg lights the chalice, I offer you these words. May this flame help us see the beauty and the power in our own stories. And may it illumine hearts and minds that we may be more aware of and appreciate the stories of others.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts dwells within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
This week in Reimagining Chapel, we've been talking about the stories of courageous people, and our UU of the week definitely fits that description. Courageous people often face difficult and dangerous situations that unfortunately do not always end happily, as is the case with this week's UU of the week. James Reeb was born in Kansas in 1927. He was not a healthy child and had severe vision issues that were not able to be corrected until he was in high school. Due to his father's work, the family moved throughout the South and the West. Finishing high school in Casper, Wyoming, James loved football, debate, and social justice. He saw the needs of the people in his community and wanted to create a more economically just society where no one's human rights were denied. James's family attended several different Christian churches in his youth. Every time they moved, they found a new church. By the end of high school, he was pulled with his faith and desire to create a more just world to start Presbyterian ministry. While he deeply desired to enter theological school, when James graduated in 1945, the United States was still at the tail end of World War II. James joined the Army and served in Anchorage, Alaska. After the Army, James returned home to Casper, Wyoming to attend junior college. From there, he transferred to St. Olaf College in Minnesota. James married Marie Deason on the summer of 1950. James entered Princeton Theological Seminary and was ordained in 1953. He became a hospital chaplain and began to be deeply involved in pastoral counseling. To become even more advanced, he actually enrolled in another master's program to receive a pastoral counseling degree. It was around this time that James's faith evolved. He began to see the world through a more liberal, humanist religious lens. Presbyterianism was no longer where he saw his future in the ministry. Through a series of lectures and a well-read religious education text written by Sophia Lyon-Fawes, he realized he was actually Unitarian. He resigned his Presbyterian ministry and began working with the American Unitarian Association to become ordained. James began his work right away, immediately starting to work with the economically disenfranchised in Philadelphia. When he was able, he moved with his family to Washington, D.C. to begin work at All Souls Church as an assistant minister. Never one to shy away from hard conversations, James moved his ministry outside the walls of the church to the larger community, working with outside groups to address social problems in the Washington, D.C. area. Due to his position as assistant minister, James didn't do a lot of preaching. James wanted a pulpit of his own in a racially diverse community, working towards justice and care for one another. Unfortunately, no such congregation existed. James decided to take a position in Boston at a low-income housing group. The family moved to Roxbury, a Black community in Boston. His daughter remembers him being adamant that the family could not live a segregated life and still make a difference in the lives of those that they served. The Reed family joined the Arlington Street Church in Boston, and James met Jack Mendelson, the congregation's social activist minister. Maintaining his ministry, James joined the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Religion and Race, created by another UU of the week, Homer Jack. The country was in the throes of the 1960s civil rights movement. After a day of police brutality against 500 protesters marching from Selma to Montgomery in Alabama, the UUA received a telegram from Dr. Martin Luther King asking ministers and people of faith to join the marchers in Selma. Always one to side with justice, James had to go to Alabama against his wife's real concerns for his safety. He joined over 2,500 marchers in Selma. That evening, James had dinner with two colleagues in a predominantly Black neighborhood. As they were driving home, their car was attacked by white men shouting awful racial epithets at them. While everyone in the car was injured, James received a severe blow to the head. At the time, there were no neurosurgeons in Montgomery, and an ambulance had to transfer him to Birmingham, 90 miles away. 2 days later, he died. James Reeb's death became an unfortunate lightning bolt to the movement. His funeral, held at Brown Chapel in Selma, was attended by an enormous crowd. The president of the UUA offered prayers, and Dr. King gave the eulogy, saying, quote, "He was a witness to the truth that men of different races and classes might live, eat, and work together as brothers." On the evening of the funeral, President Lyndon B. Johnson spoke to a joint session of Congress proposing the Voting Rights Act. Later that summer, after a lengthy debate and discord, the law was passed. James Reeb lived his life with an eye towards justice and faith. His memory lives on as a courageous person who gave his life for the fight for equality.
This was written by Kathleen McTeague a few years ago. There's always a story. In church on Sunday mornings, we read aloud the names of American soldiers that were killed in the Iraq-Afghanistan wars each week. Alone in my study the night before, I speak each name out loud and wonder about their stories. I imagine this is the babies they once were, held in someone's arms at a baptism or a naming ceremony. The proud relatives gathered around as the name was formally bestowed, and everyone beamed and cooed. Everyone beamed as the name was formally bestowed, and the baby cooed and wailed and fidgeted. There was so much gladness and pride in each of that naming. And not once did anyone imagine their baby walk would end 18 to 20 years later in a mix of blood, dust, half the world. As part of a witness for peace on Memorial Day, a cairn of stones was built at a busy downtown intersection in Hartford, each stone bearing the name of a fallen American or one of the thousands of Afghani and Iraqi civilians who died in those wars. How do you choose one name that lies so much carnage and loss? I finally brought 3 stones to the cairn, one for each of my own children, and each stone name of it who died on the birthday of one of mine. As I placed the stones, I wondered about their names. Always, always there is a story.
My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak, where sweat doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end. My sight as deep as the sea. Beating my heart as the measures of all of love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Bringing my song is the wind of my breast, and my love was over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love goes over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new, our dreaming shows us the way. Once our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
I've always wanted to do a Memorial Day service such as we're doing this morning. A service that expands a bit on the definition of service to our country and those who have died in service to our country. I respect Memorial Day very much. We should remember and honor those who gave their lives in military service to the nation. We can argue about whether or not political leaders made wise decisions in those lives of our military service people on the line. But that should not diminish the sacrifice of those who served and continue to serve. But there are also people who gave their lives for our country, for our freedom, for our rights, for our best version of ourselves, who did not fight in wars with foreign enemies, but rather fought wars here on our own soil with domestic enemies. When people swear national oaths of office, they do not swear to protect and defend the United States or our leaders or the president. When our national politicians and military service people swear their oath of office, they swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies both foreign and domestic. And throughout our history, thousands of people have died at the hands of domestic enemies. Our Constitution, and say is our best version of ourselves. They did so with ideas and prayers and words. They made the ultimate sacrifice to expand the definition of we the people, to include more people, different people, other people, all people. And I've always wanted to add to the celebration of Memorial Day. So this morning I want to tell you about a handful of them. One of them was James Reeb that we heard in our video, our story this morning. So if we're going to do this, why not start with Unitarian, who was a person who gave their life in service to our country to create beloved community. And yes, we can think of others that all of us know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Emmett Till, Harvey Milk. But I want to add into this Memorial Day the stories of some people that many of you may not know. Just because we do not know their story does not mean there were not a lot of people whose sacrifice was any less important or meaningful than the sacrifice of the people whose stories we do know. And the world is full of people who history will never know about, who did the right thing and gave their lives for it. So here are a few of the stories I find interesting among the many I could have chosen. Inez Mulholland's last public words were, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" This information I'm going to share with you comes from many websites about Inez Mulholland, especially the InezMulholland.org site. Inez Mulholland spoke these last public words as she collapsed on the stage at Blanchard Hall in Los Angeles in front of almost 2,000 people. It was October 23rd, 1916, just 2 weeks or so before the presidential election. She had been seriously ill, and this public address was the last of 50 speeches she made in 11 states in 4 weeks. She was crisscrossing the western 12 states where women already had the right to vote, campaigning for Woodrow Wilson's opponent because Wilson was not supporting the women's suffrage amendment. Mulholland had a law degree from New York University, and she supported the women's garment workers and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory struggle. She led a march for suffrage down Fifth Avenue in New York City in 1912, and from that was drafted by Alice Paul to lead a march for suffrage that interrupted Wilson's inaugural parade on March 3rd, 1913. That day, she led 8,000 women down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House atop a horse dressed as Joan of Arc. You gotta love that. Inez Mulholland died of anemia and other complications in Good Samaritan Hospital in LA a couple weeks after her collapse at Blanchard Hall. She was 30. She wasn't in the military. She wasn't murdered. But she had given her health and her life to the cause of women's right to vote. She is an American hero every bit as worthy as a soldier who died on Bunker Hill or at Gettysburg, to be remembered as one who gave their life for our freedom and our country and its best aspects. The soldiers who died in World War II gave their lives for a better version of America and our freedom because of Inez Mulholland's sacrifice. Alberta Odell Jones grew up in Louisville, Kentucky in the 30s and 40s. There are many places to find information about her, particularly concise and quick is blackpast.org, and this comes from that site and some others. She graduated from Howard Law School after starting her law school career at University of Louisville, and then opened a law office in Louisville in 1959. And one of her first clients for whom she served as agent was Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali. She marched on Washington with Dr. King in August 1963. She became an activist and registered 6,000 African American voters in Louisville. and the new voters were enough to totally shake up municipal elections. And new civic leaders, thus elected,
We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. I am alone and I am searching, hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced on the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfection to be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition my heart, I am gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who have come before me, and together and in my life, loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side. When we get there, we'll discover all of the gifts you've been given to share have been with us since life's beginning, and we never noticed they were there. We can balance on the brink of wisdom, never recognizing that we are right. Loving spirits will live together. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. We're all swimming to the other side.
hello. I believe we lost our internet connection somewhere between the church and our production center and you during this stormy morning. So we're going to back up the sermon a little bit to the story of Alberta Odell Jones, who grew up in Louisville, Kentucky in the 1930s and 40s. She graduated from Howard Law School, opened a law office in Louisville in 1959, and being an African-American and woman lawyer, one of her first clients was the boxer Cassius Clay. She served as his early agent. He later became Muhammad Ali, and she later marched on Washington with Dr. King. She became an activist and began to register African-Americans in Louisville to vote. Registering over 6,000 African-American voters, they shook out of office the segregationist town officials enough that the new officials were able to enact one of the first public accommodations laws of the civil rights era. She was Louisville City Attorney in 1964 and then became prosecutor for the Family Court in 1965, where a lot of her work was prosecuting white men for spousal abuse. And she was found dead in the Ohio River on August 5th, 1965. She was 35 years old and had been beaten to death before being dumped in the river. Her murder is still unsolved. She never served in the military, but Alberta Odell Jones was killed in service to our country, killed in a war for civil rights, which still goes on and still takes unarmed Black lives. She's an American hero, every bit as much as a soldier who died on Juno Beach or Korea or in Vietnam. She is to be remembered, I believe, as someone who gave their life for our freedom and our country. Those who gave their lives in World War II, in Vietnam, and Korea, gave their lives for a slightly better version of America than the one Alberta Odell Jones grew up in. And we still remember her sacrifice as we work to dismantle white supremacy culture in our religious association and in our country. My third story this morning is about Marsha P. Johnson, who was given the name Malcolm Michaels Jr. at birth in New Jersey in 1945, the fifth of 7 children in an African-American family. She served in the Navy after high school and moved to New York City, eventually found herself homeless and working as a prostitute. Eventually, she found a home in the queer community of Greenwich Village and became a renowned drag queen. She toured the world. She helped homeless queer youth and mentored other drag queens. And on June 28, 1969, when the police of New York City raided the Stonewall Inn, a bar on Christopher Street that was a gathering for the spot for the gay community, she was one of the people who led an on-the-spot resistance to the raid. And in the 1960s, we need to understand, those of us who are too young to remember or not there, that being an LGBTQ person was still illegal, and New York laws were particularly harsh. Raids like this were common and used to humiliate the patrons. But on this night, led by Marsha P. Johnson and some others, people fought back. When police blocked their way, they threw stones, and the police barricaded themselves inside the Stonewall. The crowd outside got bigger and threw coins and bricks and bottles and even a parking meter and trash. The fire department showed up and the police SWAT team. The crowd chanted, "Liberate Christopher Street" and "Gay Power." Gay homeless youth in a nearby park got involved and blocked the newly arriving police. The police tried to disperse the crowd, but the crowd knew the neighborhood very well and just scattered down the alleys and side streets and regrouped back at the Stonewall. Marsha P. Johnson was one of the orchestrators of this resistance. Marsha P. Johnson was found dead in the Hudson River on July 6, 1992. Authorities claim it was a suicide. Friends acknowledged even though Marsha struggled with some mental health issues, she never appeared suicidal. And although that can be incredibly rough to determine, the murder of trans people just for being trans people is something we still know is all too common. Her case, still unsolved, was reopened just a few years ago. Particularly helpful information for this story came from the National Park Service, as the Stonewall Monument, now on the site of that resistance, is part of our national park system. I'm going to close up by talking a little bit about a UU minister friend of mine who is an Army chaplain. When I get together with him and some other friends and we start talking and people start mentioning a real difficult thing or person or something going on in their congregation, George will say, "Yeah, the thing I love about being an Army chaplain is my congregation has to call me sir," which always gives us all a good laugh. But George is also a therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he spent time as a chaplain in Kandahar and in some real heavy places, serving the people who serve in our armed forces. He writes, "As an Army chaplain and therapist, I understand the spiritual, psychological, and physiological foundations of trauma. I can talk for hours about how the body keeps score, about vagus nerve responses, about flight, fight, or freeze. I can reflect with you about the spiritual meaning of loss, grief, and suffering, and how they fit in your life, and how they can burden the soul if held too tightly. I understand all this, yet not a day goes by when something doesn't bring to mind a young life now gone. Ghosts of what might have been are my everyday companions. I will not let them go, for I fear if I do, I will forget. I'm greeted when least expected with waves of unbidden grief, a tightness in the throat, vision blurred by welling tears, tremor in my hands, all things that remind me that I cannot and will not forget. How many children lost? How many parents grieved? These memories, these ghosts, are necessary reminders of the futility of war and the desperate need for peace in our world. The memories which come upon me not as thoughts but as bodily sensations have deepened my compassion and steeled my commitment to bringing peace to the suffering world. I serve in the United States Army. I support the readiness of those who have and will fight and win wars civilian leaders call us to fight. I love the people I am called to serve, knowing full well the dreadful reality we will one day face again. How then can I speak of peace? This is the difficulty of a day like Memorial Day. But Memorial Day is not to be celebrated. It is to be observed, scrutinized, and witnessed on behalf of the true witness of our human failure to love our neighbor as ourselves. They are ghosts now, haunting lives with the gift of remembrance so that we will not forget their living. But even more, that the grief of remembering will create in us a yearning for peace that stirs us to action.
As we come together this morning, we create an altar in memory of those we have lost. Military veterans on this Memorial Day, our ancestors who fought for social justice and equity, and our loved ones. As we add the names that Reverend Tony has just shared to our altar, we invite those of you at home to create sacred space in your home by adding a remembrance of your loved one, speaking their name aloud, or writing their name in the chat.
Tell us that story. Share with us the story of the picture.
The story of the picture is a picture of my father-in-law, Larry O'Brien, who fought in World War II, and he worked on the planes. And my mother-in-law's name was Bubbles. I've spoken of her before in this community. And this is a picture of one of the fighter planes with Bubbles written across the front of it, and it's a picture of my father-in-law looking up at the plane during World War II.
We have many military veterans in our family, but only one who died in service, my great-uncle Joe, my mom's Uncle Joe, who died on the beaches of Normandy. He was there with his brother Charlie, who survived, and went home to lead a very wonderful, prosperous, and important life for those of us in the Portuguese community in the New Bedford area. He was the first Portuguese postmaster general in that whole area and in the state of Massachusetts. Shall we lead into Spirit of Life for all of these people we remember and all of their stories?
Spirit of life, come to me, come to sing in my heart, oh stirrings of compassion, blow with the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand.
a community that shares its stories with one another. Part of our ritual gatherings involves sharing the joys and concerns, the prayers, the dreams, the anxieties in our heart with one another. We were looking forward to this morning having people be able to come forward and do this live and in person among us once again. But we do want to offer these joys and concerns so that everyone knows some of this stuff is going on with our community. We have candles of joy this week for Melissa Murphy, who celebrated a birthday. And we have a candle of joy for Jenny Reed Haggins, who was recently certified to be a social studies teacher in the state of Connecticut, something she's been working for a while. Unfortunately, Jenny Reed Haggins has also had some difficult news finding out she has cancer recently. The prognosis is good, however, and she looks forward to getting into the classroom as a social studies teacher when her treatment is wrapped up. Our candles of concern and sorrow continue with Becky Skinner in the wake of her husband Joe's death and funeral, Adele Taylor, who passed away recently, Stephen Galen Nahas, Paul Rhiannon and Richard Klein, Randy Heath, and everyone among us and all those we love who are suffering from illnesses both visible and invisible. We hold closely and dearly in our hearts this morning also all those recovering from cancer and recovering from surgery, and for all the people of Palestine and Israel, that their leaders might find a way to end the struggle and bring peace. Source of all peace and compassion, we remember this Memorial Day weekend all those who have given their lives in service to our country. Certainly all those who made the ultimate sacrifice in military service, protecting our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And also all of those who gave their lives in service to our country, fighting to make sure that everyone is granted these same rights and freedoms, for which those who died in military service fought to protect. We name the trauma, the grief, and the emptiness of loss that can fill this day as we remember those we loved who made the ultimate sacrifice for love and for peace. This year we remember those who gave their lives fighting the COVID pandemic, those who died tending the sick, those who died who may have been teaching our children, those who died and had been helping others as a way of life. Nothing can replace their loss. Only memory can honor them. And so we remind ourselves to never forget. We hold them in a special place of honor that can only be bestowed on those who lay down their life for others. Living Spirit of love, give us the compassion and commitment to be your peace given in loving sacrifice to a troubled world. Remind us in our darkest hour when called to give all of ourselves, perhaps even our lives in the cause of goodness, kindness, compassion, and justice, that there is an undefeatable love that holds us all and will ultimately prevail.
There is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all. I rest in this love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love.
As our service nears its end, we will close our altar, holding those who we love in our hearts.
Dear ones, we are grateful you have been with us this Sunday morning of Memorial Day weekend. We hope that you have heard the stories of those who have given their lives in service to our country, creating beloved community, and will add this type of remembrance to your ongoing remembrance and observance of Memorial Day. We are wrapping up our month on the spiritual theme of story, and so as we put out our chalice and close out our service, I remind you to let this flame live in your heart. May it remind you to live into your own beautiful, wonderful, courageous, and powerful story, and to open your ears, your mind, and your heart to better seeing, hearing, and understanding the stories of others. Go in peace, holy ones. We'll see you next week.